Basic psychology, conformity. Types of conformity. Have you ever wondered why people conform?
Yes, I have. I think it has to do with fitting in with the group.
That's right. There are three types of conformity: compliance, internalization, and identification. Compliance is the weakest form and occurs when individuals go along with the group to gain approval or avoid disapproval.
Interesting. What about internalization?
Internalization is the strongest form of conformity. It occurs when individuals accept the group's viewpoint because they believe it is right. This can lead to both public and private acceptance of the group's viewpoint.
And what about identification?
Identification is a form of conformity that is stronger than compliance but weaker than internalization. It occurs when individuals accept the group's attitudes and behaviors because they want to be associated with the group. This influence may be temporary and change when they are out of the group.
I see. Can you give me an example of identification?
Sure. A child may start smoking because they want to be seen as one of the cool kids. They accept the behavior as true and want to identify with the group.
That's a great example. I now understand the different types of conformity and why people conform.
Explanations for conformity.
Have you ever felt the need to conform to a group's behavior or attitudes?
Yes, I have. It's a common human tendency to conform to social norms.
There are two types of conformity: normative and informational social influence.
Normative social influence occurs when we conform to the group's behavior to avoid rejection or disapproval.
Interesting. So, we conform to avoid negative social consequences?
Yes, that's right. In contrast, informational social influence occurs when we accept information from others as evidence about reality.
So, we conform to gain knowledge or understanding.
Exactly. When we are uncertain about the correct course of action, we may rely on others and conform to their behavior or attitudes.
Can you give me an example of normative social influence?
Sure. Imagine you're in a group of friends who are all wearing a particular brand of clothing. You may feel the need to conform to the group's clothing choice to avoid rejection or disapproval.
I see. And what about informational social influence?
An example of informational social influence is when you're unsure about how to solve a problem, and you rely on the expertise of others to guide your decision-making process.
Thanks for explaining that. It's interesting to learn about the reasons behind conformity.
It is. Understanding why we conform can help us make better decisions and be more aware of our behavior and attitudes. Variables affecting conformity. There are several factors that influence conformity, such as group size, unanimity, and task difficulty.
That's interesting. I read that as the majority group size increases, so does conformity. Is that true?
Yes, Asch's research found that group size affects conformity up to a certain point. For example, when there were 3 to 5 participants, conformity was the highest. However, when the group size was increased to 15 Confederates, there was no increase in conformity.
What about unanimity? How does that affect conformity?
Unanimity, which means agreement by all those involved, also affects conformity. Asch found that when all the Confederates gave the same incorrect response, conformity was as high as 33%. However, when a Confederate went against the majority and gave the correct answer, conformity rates dropped to 5.5%.
What about task difficulty? How does that affect conformity?
Asch also investigated how task difficulty affects conformity rates. His research found that as task difficulty increases and the correct answer becomes less obvious, conformity also increases. This suggests that as individuals look to others for guidance on what the correct response is, informational social influence becomes the dominant force.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that. Are there any individual differences that play a role in conformity?
Yes, Lucas et al. Found that the influence of task difficulty is moderated by the self-efficacy of individuals who were confident in their own abilities even when task difficulty was very high. This demonstrates how situational variables such as task difficulty and individual differences such as self-efficacy play a key role in determining conformity in individuals. Solomon-Asch line study, 1956. Solomon-Asch line study is a study that demonstrated the effects of social influence on conformity.
What did Asch find out?
He showed how people were willing to go against compelling evidence from their senses to conform with the majority group consensus. This came to be known as the Asch effect.
How did he conduct the study?
Asch gathered male student volunteers to take part in a laboratory experiment for what they believed to be a test of vision. Participants were shown a stimulus line and then 3 other lines labeled A, B, or C. They were then asked one by one to say out loud which of the 3 sets of lines they were shown matched the stimulus line. All except one student were Confederates, which were primed to give the same incorrect responses.
What were the findings of the study?
In critical trials, over 1/3 of real participants conformed to the majority group's incorrect answer. 75% of real participants conformed at least once in the experiments. Normative social influence was the reason given by most participants as the reason for conforming to the majority's incorrect view.
What are the strengths and weaknesses of the study?
A strength for Asch's line study was it was conducted in a laboratory setting. This enabled Asch to have control over all the variables and be certain that the Confederates were the ones influencing the responses. Another strength for using a laboratory setting for Asch's study was it enabled researchers to more easily replicate the study. However, a weakness of Asch's study is it lacks ecological validity as it was conducted in a laboratory setting. This means the setup and environment were not realistic of real-world situations as all the participants were in an artificial environment and aware of being monitored. This may have resulted in very different behavior compared to what they may have done in the real world as the study lacked mundane realism.